So this talk is about the COVID pandemic. Normally I just stick to things like physics, but what happens is the same methods used in physics really gets applied to all of science. And with the pandemic at the moment of COVID-19, you can see the same things being played out by the scientists as regard that. What they do is move goalposts. Physicists move goalposts, as I point out in some of my videos, and now we get to the pandemic, and the scientists and the medical doctors dealing with that also play the game of moving the goalposts. So as a reminder, the origin of the phrase moving the goalposts is derived from the idea in sport of moving the goalposts, like you see in this picture here. It alludes to the perceived unfairness in changing the goal one is trying to achieve after the process one is engaged in has already started. And in the case of the pandemic, scientists and others like medical doctors will say one thing and wait a bit and they say something different, so they're moving the goalposts. So from my perspective, watching the scientists and the medical doctors saying one thing and later change their mind and saying something different has been what this pandemic has all been about. They're just moving goalposts. Well, I'm not going to deal with all the goalposts that they move, just some of them. One of the people that have come forward as an expert on the subject of the pandemic and in the news a lot, and that is Fauci. So this is the person, Anthony Fauci. He's an American physician, scientist and immunologist, and he's in the news quite a lot, giving his opinions about what to do about COVID-19 and so forth. And he's been caught several times lying. And so I'm going to take an example from RT news service from the 25th of December in 2020, and it's quite an interesting example, and there are lots of other examples you can go for with Fauci. So this is the headline from RT news service. The headline is "Fauci admits the lying about COVID-19 herd immunity threshold to manipulate public support for vaccine and moves goalposts to 90%. So in the title there, headline title, it's talking about moving goalposts. So this is what the article says. Dr. Anthony Fauci has viewed almost religiously as a hero by mainstream media outlets and Democrat politicians, has admitted he lied to Americans to manipulate their acceptance of a new COVID-19 vaccine. The intentional deception involved estimates for what percentage of the population will need to be immunised to achieve herd immunity against COVID-19 and enable return to normalcy. Earlier this year, Fauci said 60 to 70%, a typical range for such a virus, but he moved the goalposts. So he's moved. This is the article which is explicitly pointing out that goalposts have moved, and so he moved the goalpost to 70 to 75% in television interviews about a month ago. Last week he told CNBC that the magic number would be around 75, 80, 85%. So he's coming up with lots of different percentages. When pressed on the moving target in a New York Times interview, Fauci said he purposely revised his estimates gradually. The newspaper which posted the article on Thursday said Fauci changed his answers partly based on science and partly on his hunch. So he's supposed to be giving science, and he's not committing himself to completely giving you a scientific point of view. He's giving you his hunch as well. And it says the country is finally ready to hear what he really thinks. When Paul said only about half of all Americans would take a vaccine, I was saying herd immunity would take 70 to 75%, Fauci said. Then when newer surveys said 60% or more would take it, I thought I could nudge this up a bit, so I went up to 80, 85%. So he's manipulating the numbers, not based on science. Fauci added that he doesn't know the real number, but believes the range is 70 to 90%. He said it may take nearly 90%, but he won't give that number because Americans might be discouraged, knowing that voluntary acceptance won't be high enough to reach that goal. So he's playing around with the numbers. So the relevant part I want to concentrate on, putting aside all the other issues, whether he's lying, etc., is the quote where it says, earlier this year, Fauci said 60 to 70%, a typical range for such a virus, but he moved the goalpost to 70 to 75% in television interviews about a month ago. So relevant words is move the goalpost. Scientists just seem to think moving goalposts is acceptable behaviour, and they don't seem to think of it as lying. That they will say one thing one moment and later say something completely different. The whole COVID pandemic has been characterised by supposed experts saying one thing and then moving the goalposts and saying something else. The general public just gets bombarded with conflicting messages. Is it then any wonder that a part of the public becomes sceptical and wants to then dismiss everything being said by them as just more and more lies? Worse, the scientists want to defend their position of moving goalposts as an acceptable way of doing science. So I'm referring to an article now from New Scientist magazine. The article first starts talking about astrophysics and then connects it to the COVID pandemic. So this is the article, and the title is Scientists are often cautious or wrong, and that's okay. So it's okay for scientists to be wrong. They can tell you something and be wrong about it, and then move the goalposts and tell you something else. So this is what the article is telling you. It starts off, it says, earlier this month, science journalist Adam Mann reported a story for Science News that had one of my favourite headlines of 2021. Astronomers may have seen a star gulp down a black hole and explode. The article discusses a new paper published in Science on the 3rd of September and describes observations of a supernova that were collected with the Very Large Array Radio Telescope in New Mexico. The strong radio signal observed in coordination with this event suggested to lead researcher Long and his team that they should follow up using a different set of tools, this time through optical and X-ray observations. So it's all just talking about astrophysics things. And if we're skipping through a bit to that next paragraph, paragraph afterwards, where it says, I enjoyed the Science News piece for a couple of reasons. First, what a stellar piece of headline writing that brings a deeply unfamiliar physical environment into a relatable context. Second, Mann's writing succeeds at being both accessible and exciting. So he's still going on about the astrophysics for the time being. Though I'm a professional scientist, when it comes to reading outside my main topic of interest, I join the general public in being somewhat dependent on fellow science writers to keep me informed about new developments. So they're just going by what other people were telling them. They don't have personal knowledge themselves. Like people who don't study astrophysics at all, I still stand to learn something from science in the media. On the other hand, one of my best parts of being a professional physicist who reads popular science is that when I get really excited about an idea, I head right to the source and don't rely solely on other people's interpretations. This is exactly what I did after reading Mann's excellent rundown. In this particular case, I felt the urge to look at the science paper because my training as a physicist has led me to always read these stories with a healthy skepticism. Exactly how sure are we that the model held up in this paper is the best one to fit the data? Exactly how sure are we that the model best fits the data? That is a question every scientist has been trained to ask. That I'm asking this question isn't a knock against the team involved. This is always the key question that every scientist has been trained to ask, especially in a field like astronomy where experiments can't exactly be replicated. So he's still carrying on. It's going to take some time to get to about the COVID. To give you a sense of the translation work required, the title of the actual paper is A Transient Radio Source Consistent with Meteor-Triggered Core Collapse Supernova. My first task is actually passing this title. A transient is an astronomical phenomenon that occurs on human timescales from seconds to years, and he's carrying on talking about that. All of the terms in the title are key, but the one that related to my question was consistent. In other words, the paper isn't actually claiming for certain that what the team observed was a merger triggered core collapse supernova. What the researchers are saying is that the data can be explained by this model, giving merit to the model and providing a plausible explanation for the data. So in this case, we don't have a definite knowledge of what the model is, but we're finding out the data is fitting a certain model. You might find yourself wondering whether this careful non-commitment is a weakness, but to me as a scientist is a strength that makes me inclined to trust the authors. So this weakness in not being sure if the model that fits the data is really the model, he thinks that is a strength. So weakness is really being then interpreted as a strength. I know that the researchers involved probably aren't making claims beyond what the data indicates. Maybe this is disappointing to hear. After all, science is frequently discussed in public as if it is authoritative. Science becomes synonymous with known. Indeed, there is much knowledge that we feel certain about thanks to scientific work, but before we arrive at a place of certainty, there is an actual doing of science, which means operating the boundary of what is known and unknown. So he's pointing out there is uncertainty in science. Now we're going to get to the bit which ties into the COVID pandemic. He says, science requires a flexible mindset. We may think we are right about something and turn out to be wrong. So, science is often wrong. As we gather more data, our perspective may change. Aha, because you're wrong. You can be often wrong and then you have to change your mind. The public is getting a lesson in real time about what this looks like with the COVID-19 pandemic. So we got to that. So what we're talking about here is a flexible mindset, and this perspective may change, which means, in other words, you're moving the goalposts. One moment you're going to say one thing and later you're going to change your mind and say something else. And he thinks it is acceptable behaviour, and refers to that as what is going on with the COVID pandemic. And now the public is getting a lesson. That is what the scientists do. They keep moving the goalposts. Say one thing one moment, then change their mind and say something else. So here we have a picture of goalposts being moved, and this is how scientists would play football. If the opposing team tries to score a goal, then they move the goalposts out of the way. It's how scientists play science, and so they think that is a allowed way of doing things. While most non-scientists would interpret doing something like that as lying or cheating. And after moving the goalposts, they try sweeping under the carpet that they have moved the goalposts, in the hope that no one noticed. And that is my observation of this COVID pandemic. Scientists and so other supposed experts just say one thing one moment and then move the goalposts and say something else, and they want to be respected for doing that. They think they're allowed to do that. Well, as a normal person would say, oh, they're lying now. You changed your mind and you're saying something else, and you're not acknowledging properly that you've changed your mind. That is dishonest behaviour. So that's my lesson. Thank you.